Hi guys, I am a matric of 2024 and I'm currently taking a gap year. This was an unplanned gap year. I did not plan to take a gap year. The plan was not to stay at home and do nothing. But because of the stuff that I wasn't told in 2023 and 2024, well, grade 11 and grade 12, that have led me to taking a gap year. So I feel like it is my duty to tell the class of 2025 as well as the upcoming matrics of the harsh realities that they don't tell you in grade 11 and grade 12. Okay, so just to give you some context of who I am a class of 2024 and I went to not a very prestigious high school, but a well-known high school. I will not be giving information for my safety. But then the subjects that I took were maths, Afrikaans first additional, life orientation, English home language, bio, physics, and French second additional languages. The grade 11 marks matter. They matter a lot. And I don't want to put pressure on you and I don't want to scare you, but that is the harsh reality. In grade 11, my marks were not that good. I got, I think, about a 28 to 30 APS score. And I had applied for different courses and they weren't that many because of how low my APS score was. But then when I got into matric, my APS went to a 41 because I pushed through. But then I still did not get acceptance into a single university. So what I wanted to tell you was that your grade 11 marks do matter. And getting provisional acceptance is actually important. They don't really tell you this in some schools. In some schools they don't tell you that provisional acceptance is important, but it really is, because it's kind of like securing your spot at the university, but it's not 100% confirmed. So one of my friends, she actually got provisional acceptance in grade 11, but then in matric her marks weren't the best, but then she still got into university. Whereas I hadn't gotten provisional acceptance in grade 11, but my matric results were so good to the point where I had gotten 5 of my subjects 70% and up. And I wasn't that mad because I didn't want to go into any career that needed a high APS score. I wanted to go into law and I met all the minimum requirements and above. But because of my grade 11, I didn't get provisional acceptance. They replied to me and said that, oh, we can't take you because there's no space, or the space was full. So that's what I wanted to just tell you. Provisional acceptance does matter, but then if you don't get in, it's not the end of the world. And another thing is knowing the career path that you want to get into. So if you're the type of person that doesn't know what career choice you want to go into, what interests you have, then I would recommend taking a gap year, because then you are able to see what you like and what you don't like. But then the mistake that I had made is that I had allowed for myself to be pressured from people outside me, mainly my family, or my mom to be more specific. She wanted me to go into medicine and I thought, okay, medicine isn't that bad, so on and so forth. So when I applied for medicine and I applied to be a nurse. But then later on in the year, I realized that no, I actually enjoyed law. I enjoyed civil rights law and I wanted to get into law. But then when I had applied, I applied for nursing, medicine, and then bio. So then when I had gotten my results and they sent it to the university saw that, oh, you applied for medicine but now you want to change to law, but we don't have space for either or, so we can't take you. So I would recommend knowing what you want to do or the career path that you want to get into before you apply. Another thing is to not overlook private universities. So I understand that private universities are extremely expensive. They might even be more expensive than some government universities. But then don't completely rule them out of your university list. I would say, if you can, prepare yourself to go to a private university if you know that your marks are not that good. Because if the class of 2025 does outperforms the class of 2024, then if we're being very realistic, a lot of you are going to get rejected. So instead of putting all your hope into government universities, I would also say try and see if you can find a way to get into private universities or have funding for private universities. Because some people don't want to take a gap year, some people don't feel like taking a gap year. So look into private universities, do some research, because there are private universities out there that do scam students. So please look into your private university, look into the courses that they offer, look into the APS score, the minimum requirements, and you might even find out that you meet the minimum requirements for the private universities than the government university. Now, for those of you that are in matric this year and are currently in school, I want to let you know that term 1, 2, and 3 matter. Your marks in term 1, 2, and 3 actually make up 25% of your entire year mark, but then prelims count the most. So, all the little tests that you're doing in term 1, term 2, and then I think term 3 is when you write your prelims. So, basically, term 1 and term 2. The little tests that you write in those terms, they do matter because they make up part of the 25%. So do your best in those papers, because you could have a really high mark and a really low mark little test and then have a really high mark in prelims. They still matter, they still combine to that 25%. But if you didn't do well in term 1 and term 2, term 3 is where you push the most, because prelims count the most. Prelims is where you see what you understand and what you don't understand. And prelims probably count around 17.5%. So if you did bad from your little tests in term 1 and term 2, you can make up for that in term 3. So now I'll be giving you the tips that I used in matric that got me from a 50% in Afrikaans to a 78% in my final. So for English and Afrikaans, you have to be ahead of the teacher. What I mean by this is you're going to be doing a lot of poems. There are going to be about 10 poems that you do in English and in Afrikaans, and they're both different poems. So what I did in matric was that we had a book where we wrote the poem in our books, and then on the side you wrote the meaning of each and every single line. So this is something that your teachers should do inside the class with you as they explain and they go through the literature and everything. But what you can do as a student is to go on YouTube and look at the different explanation of each poem. So there was one YouTuber that I had watched who did English poems, and she went in detail into everything, every single line, every single language that was used, the assonance, the consonants, the alliteration, the personification, everything for every line. She gave a detailed explanation, so I would write that. So the moment I went into class, the teacher would say the exact same thing, but then they would add on to what the teacher said. So that means you've already got your notes, but then you're just picking up the little notes that your teacher will be saying. So with maths, something that my teacher would always tell us is that each section has a certain mark allocation. So for example, Euclidean geometry would be around, let's say papers out of 15, Euclidean would be around 15 marks, analytical will be 15, algebra will be 10, probability will be 10, something around that. So she would say that what you have to do is you have to try and study each and every section. This also counts physics and chemistry. You have to learn each and every section on its own. So with that, you start to see a pattern of the stuff that the section that you understand and the sections that you don't understand. So you spend the time on the stuff you don't understand, but then again, you should also understand the mark allocation. So for example, if you don't understand Euclidean geometry, but you understand algebra and Euclidean counts more than algebra, then you focus your attention on Euclidean. But that does not mean that you completely ignore algebra, because algebra should be those little marks that make up your mark in the end, the marks that are like guaranteed for you to get. But that does not mean that you should ignore them. So you spend more time on Euclidean, you spend more time on analytical. And then there's a thing that happens where some people, they understand Euclidean, they understand analytical, but it's the little topics that they don't understand. So you spend time on that. So when you're doing each section on its own, you start to disperse the time allocation to each. So physical sciences is broken down into two categories, physics and chemistry. Now, physics is the part of physical sciences that uses a lot of numbers, that uses a lot of calculations. So with physics, you'll be using numbers. For example, if you look at Newton's laws, you'll be using a lot of numbers in it. So you look at the question, and most of the time they do give you the numbers, and they ask you to calculate a certain force or to calculate a certain speed and so on. So physics, when you're studying physics, the theory doesn't matter a lot. The theory is just for you to understand why things happen the way that they do. But chemistry is the more theoretical side. So chemistry is when you have to understand the theory and actually know the theory, because you're going to apply that theory into a lot of the questions. So for example, during intermolecular forces, they're going to ask you, why does object A boil faster than object B, or why does one have a higher vapor pressure than the other? That's when it'll be for 4 marks, and you have to explain why vapor object A has more vapor than object B. So that is for 4 marks. And sentences, chemistry is basically sentences. There are certain parts of chemistry, yes, where you have to calculate and where you have to write out calculations and draw out pictures, but then chemistry is more of knowing the textbook, understanding the textbook, and being able to regurgitate what the textbook says. But physics is more about understanding what the textbook says but applying that in calculations. Comes to biology, if you really wanna study biology, study them in sections. So for example, Section 1 is DNA and RNA. Learn that topic, understand it, and then move on to the next topic. Because the thing with bio is they all intertwine. So for example, you'll do a DNA, and then you'll do dihybrid crosses and lead to evolution. So in order to learn bio, you need to know each section on its own and then combine them. So find out, how does DNA relate to dihybrid crosses? How does then that lead to evolution? Now, the thing with bio is the guidelines. There should be guidelines for bio. Those are the ones that I use. And in those guidelines is basically the memo of how to answer each and every single question. So for example, guidelines, the biology guidelines tell you exactly what they're looking for, exactly how they want you to answer, and which marks you'll get for which statement. One of the things that I will admit that helped me a lot with learning biology was Miss Angler's cheat sheets. So with those of you that don't know who Miss Angler is a biology teacher that has a YouTube channel and a TikTok channel where she explains each and every topic step by step, breaks down each and every topic. So she makes it simpler for you, for those of us that don't understand the way our teachers teach. So what she has is cheat sheets that basically summarize everything. So when I was studying for prelims and I was studying for finals, that's basically what I used, because her cheat sheets are basically a summary of your textbook and the guidelines.